We will never stand next to you. You are the disgrace of this family. Cancel those VIP tickets. I stared at the text message from my own father glowing on my phone screen. My name is Maya. I am 30 years old and an Air Force flight nurse. In just a few days, I was scheduled to stand at the Pentagon to receive a Silver Star for pulling 3 of my squad mates out of a burning transport under heavy fire. I had secured VIP seats for my family, hoping this would be the moment I finally made them proud. Instead, I gave my father's seat to he threw away, and on live national television, the military handed her a check for over $4 million. Just 1 hour later, my phone lit up with 57 missed calls from the parents who called me a disgrace. Before I tell you how a federal raid ruined my sister's perfectly funded anniversary party, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you know what it feels like to be the scapegoat in your own family. The fabric of my dress blues felt heavy as I stood in front of my bedroom mirror adjusting my collar. I read the text from my father, Pastor Thomas Jackson, one more time just to make sure I was not hallucinating. A disgrace. Not a hero. Not a survivor. A disgrace. My hands were shaking not from the lingering trauma of a combat zone, but from the familiar, suffocating weight of my family's disdain. I pressed dial on my father's contact name. The line rang twice before someone picked up, but it was not his booming preacher voice that answered. It was the loud clinking of crystal glasses, the gentle hum of a jazz pianist, and the unmistakable chatter of the Sunday brunch crowd at the Oakwood Country Club. Maya, what do you want? My mother. Valerie snapped into the receiver, her voice dropping into a harsh whisper so her wealthy friends would not hear. I just got a text from Dad. I said, keeping my tone perfectly measured, the exact way my training taught me to handle high-stress trauma situations. He told me to cancel the VIP tickets for the ceremony in Washington. I thought we agreed you were flying out Thursday morning. My mother let out an exasperated sigh that vibrated through the speaker. You are incredibly selfish. You know that we are not flying anywhere. You expect your father and me to drop everything and fly across the country for some pointless little military ribbon. This weekend is Chloe's 1-year anniversary party. Have you completely forgotten? Chloe was my younger sister, 27 years old, and the undisputed golden child of the Jackson family. I gripped the edge of my wooden dresser. Mom, the Secretary of Defense, is presenting this. It is a Silver Star. My squad almost died there. I almost died. Do you think I want to hear about your gruesome desert stories right now? Valerie hissed, entirely devoid of maternal instinct. We have real things to focus on here. Brad's parents are flying in and everything has to be flawless. I cannot believe you tried to hijack your sister's special weekend just to seek attention. I heard my mother pull the phone away from her mouth, clearly turning back to the table of women she was having brunch with. I am so sorry, ladies, I heard her say loudly, ensuring everyone at her table could hear her practiced martyrdom. It is Maya again. Always trying to upstage my Chloe. You know how she gets. Ever since Chloe married Brad and secured a real future, Maya has been throwing these little tantrums. She even scheduled some military award thing this exact weekend, just to drag us away from the anniversary gala. She simply cannot stand seeing her sister happy. The women murmured sympathetically, praising my mother for her patience. I stood there swallowing the familiar lump of betrayal in my throat. This was the exact same tone she used 5 years ago when she called me on the morning of my nursing school graduation. She had skipped my pinning ceremony because Chloe had a last-minute bridal boutique appointment and needed her mother's opinion on a silk veil. My accomplishments were always inconveniences. My survival was just a distraction from Chloe's perfect pampered life. Mom, I said sharply, tell Dad the tickets are canceled. Have a nice brunch. Wait, hold on. A heavy, smug male voice suddenly came through the receiver. It was Brad, Chloe's white husband, the man my parents worshipped, because his wealthy family offered the social connections my mother desperately craved. Listen, Captain, Brad sneered, emphasizing my rank like it was a tasteless joke. Since you are going to be sitting up there doing nothing, we need to talk business. Your dad already agreed to leverage the family church assets for my new investment firm, but the bank needs more capital. Since you are not using your veteran status to buy a house or do anything actually useful with your life, you need to sign your loan benefits over to my firm. We can use your military identity to secure a massive federal business loan. That is what real family does, Maya. You are the older sister. You do not have a husband or a family of your own to worry about. It is time you actually contributed to this family's wealth instead of just running off to play soldier. Your sister deserves this money to throw a decent party. Do not try to fight me on this, Maya. The paperwork is already drawn up and sitting in my office. Your dad told me you would comply. If you refuse, I will personally ensure your parents cut you off for good. We are hanging up now. Send me your full social security number. I am not sending you a single digit of my social security number, Brad. I kept my voice dangerously low and completely stripped of any emotion. You are absolutely out of your mind if you think I will let you commit federal fraud using my active duty military status to bail out whatever sinking ship of a startup you are running this week. A sharp and incredibly condescending laugh barked through the phone speaker. Brad was not intimidated by my warning. He was actually amused by it. Maya, this is exactly why you are 30 and alone, he sneered. The sheer audacity was bleeding through every single syllable he spoke. You are a single black woman playing nurse out in the desert. You have zero concept of real wealth building. Do you honestly think a government paycheck is going to build generational wealth for this family? Chloe and I are building an empire right now. We are playing in the big leagues, and quite frankly, your father recognizes that reality. That is why he already agreed to leverage the family assets to back my new venture. He knows a solid investment when he sees one. He is putting the heavy lifting on my shoulders while you just hold us back with your bitter spinster attitude. You should be thanking me on your knees for letting you get a piece of this pie. Leverage the family assets. The phrase echoed in my mind and triggered an immediate blaring alarm in my head. My parents had absolutely nothing liquid in their bank accounts. They lived entirely on the social currency of my father being a prominent pastor and my mother maxing out high-interest credit cards just to keep up appearances at the country club. There were no family assets to speak of, except for one specific thing. The historic church property my grandfather had purchased with his own blood and sweat after returning from World War II. It was the only piece of land our family truly owned outright, and it was sitting right in the middle of a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood where corporate developers were constantly circling like hungry vultures. Brad continued talking over the line. His voice was dripping with that unearned superiority he always carried around our family. Do not make this harder than it has to be, Maya. Thomas told me you would be difficult at first. But he also promised me you would eventually fall in line because you are desperate for their approval. Just send the number right now. I have very wealthy investors coming over for our anniversary dinner tonight, and I need to show them my collateral is securely locked in. If you ruin this for Chloe, you will never be welcome in your parents' home again. I am hanging up now, so you better text me those numbers immediately. I did not give him the satisfaction of a response or a warning. I simply pulled the phone away from my ear and hit the red end call button. I cut him off right in the middle of his arrogant threat. I tossed the phone onto my freshly made bed. I did not shed a single tear. I did not scream into my pillow. 5 years ago, maybe I would have broken down completely. I would have wondered why my own parents valued a white con artist over their own flesh and blood daughter who was out saving lives. Today, however, the blatant disrespect simply flipped a switch deep inside my chest. It was a cold and highly precise anger that demanded immediate action instead of sorrow. I was completely done seeking their validation. If Brad thought my father was leveraging family assets, it meant my father was doing something incredibly reckless behind closed doors. I needed to know exactly what Thomas was signing away to this leech. There was only one person on this earth who knew the financial history of that church better than my father did. Aunt Beatrice. Beatrice was my father's older sister. She was the strong and fiercely independent woman who actually cared for my grandfather in his final years while my father was busy building his own social status. 5 years ago, my father excommunicated her from the family and banned her from attending Sunday services. He did this simply because she refused to hand over her life savings to fund Chloe's lavish wedding to Brad. My mother told the entire congregation that Beatrice had gone crazy and needed isolation. In reality, Beatrice was the only person with enough common sense to see through their toxic charade. She knew Brad was a parasite from day one. I picked up my phone and dialed her private number. It rang for a very long time. I almost hung up thinking she might be out running errands, but then the line clicked open. The voice on the other end was not the steady and stoic Aunt Beatrice I remembered from my childhood. She was breathing heavily into the receiver. Her voice was trembling with a frantic and breathless urgency that instantly made the hair on the back of my neck stand straight up. Maya, thank God you called me. I am standing alone in the church basement right now. I just broke the heavy padlock on your grandfather's old filing chest. Her words were tumbling out so fast I could barely catch them all. I knew Thomas was acting strange when he completely changed all the security codes last week, so I snuck in through the old cellar doors. Maya, I am looking at the physical paperwork right now. What Thomas and Brad are doing with the church deed is an absolute nightmare. It is a federal crime. They are trying to steal everything our family built and erase our grandfather completely. You have to come here immediately before they realize I am inside the building and catch me with these files. I will be there in 15 minutes, I told her, dropping into the calm that always took over during combat triage. Lock the chest back, grab the files, and get out through the cellar doors. Do not let anyone see you leave. I hung up and grabbed my keys, abandoning my half-packed duffel bag for Washington. My family was actively dismantling our legacy, and I needed to see the proof with my own eyes. I sprinted down the apartment stairs, threw myself into my truck, and slammed my foot on the gas pedal. The tires screeched against the asphalt as I sped out of my complex. The drive to Aunt Beatrice's suburban home usually took 30 minutes, but I made it in under 20. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel the entire way. Beatrice lived in a small, well-kept ranch house on the outskirts of the city. It was the house she bought with her pension after my father banished her from the inner circle. I slammed the truck into park, bounded up her concrete steps, and banged on the front door. Beatrice pulled the door open before I could even lower my fist. She looked pale, her usually immaculate silver hair disheveled from her hasty escape from the church basement. She did not say a word. She just grabbed my wrist and pulled me directly into her dining room. Spread out across her floral tablecloth was a mountain of legal paperwork, banking forms, and federal loan applications. The documents were hastily stuffed into manila folders, but Beatrice had already started organizing them. Look at this, Maya, Beatrice said, her voice shaking with a mixture of profound grief and boiling rage. Look at what your father has done for that useless boy. I stepped up to the table and picked up the first stack of papers. My stomach hit the floor. Staring back at me were federal business loan applications stamped with the seal of a major national bank. Listed as the primary guarantor was my name, Captain Maya Jackson. Next to my name was my full social security number, my active duty military identification code, and forged signatures that looked terrifyingly close to my own handwriting. Brad has been secretly using your active duty status to qualify for expedited federal loans and veteran business grants, Beatrice explained, pointing a trembling finger at the approval stamps. He is bypassing standard civilian credit checks because the bank thinks a decorated Air Force officer is backing his fraudulent startup. I flipped through the pages, my vision tunneling as the scale of the identity theft became clear. He had stolen my identity. The white man my parents paraded around as the savior of our family was legally anchoring his sinking financial ship to my neck. As horrifying as the identity theft was, the second folder on the table made the air completely vanish from my lungs. I reached out and picked up a heavy notarized document. The header read, Commercial Property Collateral Transfer. Attached to it was the original deed to the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church. The church was not just a building, it was the heartbeat of our local African American community. My grandfather, World War II veteran, James Jackson, had pooled his military pay and every spare dime he earned doing manual labor to buy that land 50 years ago. He built that sanctuary with his own hands so our people would have a safe place to gather to pray and to organize. It was sacred ground. My father secretly signed over the deed to the church, I whispered, the horrifying reality clicking into place. He gave the deed to Brad. Beatrice nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. Thomas thinks Brad is a financial genius. Your father truly believes Brad is going to multiply the church assets and make our family incredibly wealthy. He signed over the property as collateral so Brad could secure a massive commercial loan to cover his debts. My mind raced through the legal implications, calculating the blast radius of this impending disaster. If Brad defaults on these loans, and he absolutely will because his company produces nothing of value, the bank will seize the church. The bank will take the land, demolish the sanctuary, and sell it to a corporate developer. My father was blindly handing over our community heritage so his white son-in-law could play pretend businessman. Our congregation would be left homeless and our grandfather's legacy bulldozed into dust. Thomas traded his own father's legacy for a seat at a country club table, Beatrice said bitterly. He sold out his own people just to impress Chloe's in-laws. I placed the forged deed back onto the table. The cold, precise anger that sparked earlier now erupted into a roaring inferno. I was going to dismantle Brad's entire life. I was going to rip my father's facade to shreds. Before I could formulate my first tactical move, my cell phone vibrated violently in my pocket. I pulled it out. The caller ID flashed Chloe's name. I stared at the screen for a brief second, meeting Beatrice's eyes. I swiped accept and pressed the phone to my ear. Maya, Chloe's voice, immediately assaulted my ears, thick with fake dramatic crying. Brad just called me. He says you are being incredibly uncooperative and hostile about the business loan. I stood frozen in Aunt Beatrice's quiet dining room, staring down at the forged documents bearing my stolen military identity. You need to stop being so selfish, Chloe sobbed into the receiver, laying on the manipulation as thick as she could. Brad is simply trying to secure our future together. If you do not sign the VA loan release forms today, his wealthy family is going to look down on us. They expect a certain standard from us, Maya. You are literally ruining my marriage and embarrassing us in front of his wealthy parents just because you are jealous of what I have. I did not even bother responding to Chloe and her manufactured tears. I simply pulled the phone away from my ear, tapped the speaker button, and set the device face up on Aunt Beatrice's polished dining room table. Chloe's fake sobbing instantly morphed into an angry, entitled screech that echoed loudly off the floral wallpaper. You are always doing this, Maya, Chloe yelled, her voice dripping with pure venom. You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of me, and now you are jealous of Brad. His family actually has real generational wealth. They have massive trust fund accounts. They actually know how the real world operates. Brad is a business genius who is trying to drag this family out of the mud and elevate us to a completely new tax bracket. You should be honored he even considered using your name. But no, you have to play the bitter, lonely sister who cannot stand seeing anyone else succeed. I ignored every single toxic syllable spilling from the speaker. Reaching into my tactical backpack, I pulled out my encrypted military laptop. The heavy metal casing made a solid thud against the table. I flipped the digital screen open carefully. I inserted my identity card into the reader and typed in my security PIN. The screen flared to life, illuminating Aunt Beatrice's stunned face. She stood perfectly still, watching me operate with the cold precision of a soldier under fire. Mom and Dad are finally getting a taste of the good life, Chloe continued to rant, her pitch rising even higher. Brad's parents are hosting a massive anniversary dinner for us this Saturday at the most exclusive restaurant in Nashville. If you sabotage this loan, Brad will look like an absolute fool in front of his wealthy, successful father today. His family will think we are just some pathetic, broke charity cases. You are acting like an angry black woman who hates seeing a successful white man take charge. You need to log into the portal right now and authorize the release, Maya. If you ruin my marriage, I will make sure Mom and Dad never speak to you again. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I bypassed the standard civilian networks and routed my connection through the secure military servers. I accessed the primary credit monitoring bureaus and pulled up my personal profile. The screen populated extremely quickly indeed. I stared at a terrifying list of unauthorized activity. Brad had not just applied for one business loan. He had submitted 5 separate applications to different federal lenders in the last 48 hours, attempting to secure over $1 million in capital, using my rank and pristine credit score. Chloe was still screaming through the phone, listing all the expensive things she planned to buy once Brad's company took off. I did not waste my breath trying to reason with a woman who had willingly sold her soul for designer handbags and false status. I moved the small cursor. I initiated a comprehensive security lockdown. I placed a hard freeze on my social security number across all three major credit bureaus. I then navigated to the fraud department and officially flagged every single one of Brad's loan inquiries as federal identity theft. With a final decisive click, my credit profile was entirely locked down. Any bank attempting to process those loans would immediately receive a red flag warning them of stolen military credentials. Brad's financial lifeline was officially severed. I leaned forward so my mouth was just inches from the phone microphone. "Enjoy your anniversary dinner, Chloe," I stated. My voice was completely void of warmth. "Tell your business genius husband to check his inbox." I tapped the red button and cut the call off, abruptly plunging the dining room back into a heavy silence. Aunt Beatrice let out a long breath she had clearly been holding for the last 5 minutes. "What did you just do?" Beatrice asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "I just cut off the oxygen to his little scam," I replied, my eyes never leaving the glowing laptop screen. "But freezing my credit is absolutely not enough today anyway." Brad forged a military officer's signature and tried to defraud the federal government. He also convinced my father to risk the church you all grew up in. I am not just going to stop him. I am going to completely bury him. I opened a new secure browser window and navigated directly to the official whistleblower portal for the Internal Revenue Service. I did not hesitate for a single second. I began typing out a highly detailed anonymous tip regarding Brad's investment firm. I outlined his fraudulent loan applications, his unauthorized use of a military service member's unique personal verified identity. I detailed his illegal leveraging of commercial church property. I made sure to include the exact names of the banks he had targeted and the forged deed Thomas had provided as collateral. The Internal Revenue Service does not play games with shell companies committing wire fraud. Once they received this tip, they would freeze Brad's entire financial network, auditing every single penny he had ever touched. He thought he could use my family as a stepping stone. I was about to show him exactly what happens when you step on a landmine. I reviewed the long tip one last time. I ensured every detail was factually devastating and legally sound. I moved the mouse and clicked submit. A confirmation message flashed on the screen. Right at that exact second, a loud chime echoed from my laptop speakers. I minimized the browser window and opened my military email client. An urgent message had just dropped into my encrypted inbox. I clicked on it. Subject: petition for posthumous honors Sergeant James Jackson. Status approved. Retroactive compensation of $4.2 million will be dispersed during your Silver Star ceremony. Who is the designated legal heir? My heart completely stopped beating instantly. I typed Beatrice Jackson into the designated field on the encrypted Pentagon portal. The prompt demanded the name of the designated legal heir for Sergeant James Jackson. My grandfather had bled for this country. He had returned home to a nation that refused to acknowledge his heroism, and he had poured every ounce of his remaining strength into building a sanctuary for his people. My father was willing to pave over that blood and sweat for a fleeting taste of high society approval. I placed my hands on the keyboard. I did not type my own name. I did not type my father's name. I typed Beatrice Jackson with steady, deliberate keystrokes and hit submit. A green confirmation banner flashed across the screen, locking the $4.2 million retroactive compensation to the one woman who had actually honored his legacy. I closed the laptop and shoved it into my tactical bag. The digital trap was fully set, but there was a glaring physical loose end. Aunt Beatrice had broken the lock on the chest in the church basement to expose the fraud, but my grandfather's original World War II dog tags were still sitting inside that metal box. If Brad realized his financial access was suddenly blocked, he would undoubtedly scramble to destroy any physical evidence tying him to the forged deed. He would destroy the chest and the dog tags right along with it. I could not let him erase the last tangible piece of my grandfather's honor. I threw on a plain black t-shirt and a pair of dark jeans, stripping away any military identification. I needed to move fast and quietly. I drove my truck across town toward the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church. It was Sunday afternoon, which meant the annual church cookout was in full swing. The parking lot was overflowing with cars. The heavy scent of smoked brisket and grilled hot links hung thick in the humid air. Up ahead, gospel music blared from large outdoor speakers, competing with the joyful shouts of children running between folding tables. It was a beautiful display of African American community and fellowship. It was also the exact community my father was preparing to leave homeless. I parked down the street and approached the church grounds on foot. I intended to slip through the side entrance and head straight down into the basement, but the crowd was too dense. I had to navigate through the sea of church elders and choir members. As I rounded the corner of the main sanctuary, the voice of Pastor Thomas Jackson boomed through the microphone over the crowd. My father stood on the elevated wooden stage, holding a plate of barbecue in one hand and a microphone in the other. He was sweating in the afternoon sun, looking out at the congregation with the practiced smile of a seasoned salesman. Brothers and sisters, my father preached, his voice carrying that familiar theatrical cadence. We talk a lot about sacrifice in this ministry. We talk about lifting each other up and building a future for our children. But faith requires action. Faith requires bringing the right people into our fold, people who know how to multiply our blessings. He gestured grandly toward the front row of folding chairs. Sitting there looking entirely out of place in his expensive polo shirt and designer sunglasses was Brad. Chloe sat next to him, beaming with unearned pride. "I want to take a moment to publicly thank my son-in-law Brad," my father announced. The crowd offered a polite smattering of applause. Brad is a financial visionary. He is taking our humble community assets and integrating them into the modern wealth-building sphere. He is doing the heavy lifting to ensure this church family steps into a brand new era of prosperity. He is our financial savior, folks. Give it up for Brad. My stomach churned with absolute disgust. The congregation clapped, completely oblivious to the fact that the man they were applauding had already signed the paperwork to bulldoze their sanctuary for a luxury condo development. My father was eagerly wrapping the noose around their necks and asking them to applaud the executioner. I did not have time to be sickened. I broke away from the edge of the crowd and made a direct line toward the heavy oak doors of the church administration office. The basement access was right behind the pastor's study. I just needed 2 minutes. I made it up the first 3 concrete steps when a solid figure suddenly stepped directly into my path, blocking the doorway. It was Brad. I had slipped away from the front row the moment he spotted me approaching. He stood on the top step looking down at me. The smug, confident smirk on his face made my jaw clench. He casually crossed his arms over his chest, leaning his weight against the heavy wooden doorframe so I could not push past him. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," Brad said, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of the church deacons standing nearby. "The renegade sister finally shows up to the cookout. I thought you were too busy playing war hero to mingle with the regular folks." "Move out of my way, Brad," I said, keeping my voice dangerously even. "I am here to collect something from the basement. You have exactly 3 seconds to step aside." Brad laughed, a sharp, grating sound. He did not move a single inch. In fact, he leaned down closer to me, dropping his voice into a harsh, vicious whisper that only I could hear over the blasting gospel music. "You do not give orders here, Captain," Brad hissed, the racial hostility bleeding openly into his tone. "You might think you are tough out in the sand, but here you are nothing but a bitter black woman with no husband and no leverage. Go back to the desert, Maya. Go back to playing nurse in the dirt because nobody here needs you. I own this family now. I own this land. You are just a roadblock I am about to run over." My muscles coiled instinctively, prepared to physically remove him from the stairs. Before I could execute the maneuver, a sharp, manicured hand aggressively grabbed my shoulder and jerked me backward. "What is wrong with you, Maya?" my mother, Valerie, shrieked. She marched up the steps, her face twisted in absolute fury. She shoved herself between Brad and me, using her own body to protect the white son-in-law, who was currently robbing her blind. "How dare you show up here dressed like a vagrant and start harassing Brad?" Valerie demanded loudly, drawing a crowd of onlookers. "We are having a beautiful community celebration. Your father is giving a speech honoring your sister's husband, and you march up here looking for a fight. You are completely ruining the festive vibe. You need to turn around and walk off this property right now before you embarrass this family any further. Leave, Maya. Leave before I have the deacons escort you out." I did not take a single step backward. I did not cower or bow my head in shame. Instead of retreating from the heavy wooden steps of the church office, I calmly bent my right knee. I reached down past the hem of my dark denim jeans and wrapped my fingers around the cold, textured grip of the tactical combat knife secured inside my boot. The metallic scrape of the steel leaving its sheath cut sharply through the humid afternoon air. The sudden flash of the dark serrated blade caught the sunlight. A collective gasp rippled through the front row of the congregation. The lively gospel music playing from the outdoor speakers faded into a muffled buzz as dozens of church members suddenly froze in place. The deacons stopped dead in their tracks. Brad instantly lost his arrogant smirk. His pale face drained of color, and he stumbled awkwardly backward, his designer sneakers slipping against the concrete stairs. He thought I was a broken scapegoat who would just take his verbal abuse. I had no idea what a combat veteran looked like when pushed into a corner. I bypassed Brad, completely ignoring his pathetic little flinch, as if he were nothing but a minor gust of wind. I marched straight through the heavy oak doors and into the pastoral study. The room smelled of expensive cologne and hypocrisy. On the massive mahogany desk sat the reason Brad was attending this cookout. A thick stack of glossy commercial real estate contracts and the forged deed to the church property resting right on top, waiting to be finalized. I did not spare a glance for those fraudulent papers yet. My eyes locked onto the custom-built wooden display case mounted securely on the back wall. It was the shrine my father built to parade my grandfather and his military service whenever it suited his ambitions. I stepped up to the wall and gripped my combat knife tightly. I wedged the thick steel blade directly into the seam of the false bottom my grandfather had designed decades ago. With one sharp twist of my wrist, the aged wood splintered and cracked open with a loud echoing snap. I reached my hand into the hidden compartment and pulled out the heavy rusted World War II dog tags that belonged to Sergeant James Jackson. This was the blood and sacrifice my father was trying to pave over for a country club membership. I looped the rusted chain around my fingers and turned my attention back to the mahogany desk. Brad finally mustered the courage to follow me inside the office, with my mother and father rushing in right behind him. Brad darted his eyes frantically to the broken display case and then down to the desk. Before he could lunge forward to protect his illicit paperwork, I brought the serrated edge of my combat knife down hard. I slashed the blade directly across the stack of forged deeds and commercial loan contracts. The sharp steel tore through the thick parchment, ripping the fraudulent agreements to absolute shreds. Brad let out a strangled, panicked yell as months of his deceptive financial planning turned into worthless confetti scattered across the pristine desk. I sheathed my knife smoothly and turned to face him, holding the rusted dog tags up high. "Keep your trash paper, Brad." I projected my voice clearly and loudly, ensuring that the acoustics of the office carried my words straight out the open doors to the front row of the congregation gathered outside. "You are going to need it to explain yourself to the federal agents." Brad stood paralyzed, staring at the shredded documents with terrified eyes. He knew his entire house of cards had just collapsed. Valerie let out an ear-piercing shriek of pure rage. "How dare you destroy his property!" she screamed, her face contorting with a blind, furious defense of the white son-in-law she worshipped. She lunged forward, closing the distance between us in a fraction of a second. She raised her manicured hand high, aiming a vicious slap directly at my face to put me back in my place. She expected me to take the hit. But I was no longer the little girl she used to bully into submission. My reflexes engaged instantly. I shot my left hand up and caught her wrist firmly in midair. My grip was an iron vise, locking her arm in place before her hand could come close to my cheek. She gasped in shock, her eyes widening as she struggled fruitlessly against my hold. I stared coldly into her eyes, letting the absolute silence in the room stretch for a painful, terrifying second. I dropped her wrist with extreme disdain, letting her arm fall uselessly to her side. "Do not ever attempt to lay your hands on me again." I turned my back on my stunned mother, my speechless father, and the trembling con artist they had foolishly welcomed into our family. I strode out of the pastoral office and walked back down the concrete steps. The large crowd of churchgoers parted silently for me, creating a wide, clear path all the way out to the parking lot. I finally reached the dusty gravel lot and walked directly toward my parked truck. I held the rusted metal dog tags. I had secured my brave grandfather and his honor. As I reached for my door handle, the sudden aggressive screech of heavy tires shattered the afternoon quiet. An unmarked black SUV sped into the lot and slammed its brakes, blocking my truck incompletely. The heavy doors swung open, and two tall men wearing dark tailored suits stepped out onto the gravel. The afternoon sun glinted off the gold shields they held up. They were FBI badges. The taller agent looked directly at me, his expression entirely serious. Captain Jackson, we intercepted a massive identity fraud flag on your active duty military profile. We need your help to set a trap. I sat in the plush leather back seat of the unmarked black SUV, the heavily tinted windows completely obscuring me from the whispering, staring churchgoers outside. The cold air conditioning blasted through the vents, but it did nothing to cool the intense fire raging in my chest. The lead officer, Special Agent Vance, turned around in his front passenger seat, pulling a thick manila folder from his leather briefcase. He spread a series of financial flowcharts and wire transfer logs across the small fold-out table between us. Captain Jackson, Agent Vance began, his voice dropping into a grave, professional tone. We have been monitoring Bradley Miller for the last 6 months. What you just exposed in that pastoral study is only the tip of a massive destructive iceberg. Brad is not just applying for reckless business loans under your stolen name. He has already finalized an illicit, under-the-table purchase agreement to sell the entire historic church property to a predatory luxury condominium development firm based out of Miami. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Selling the church, I whispered, staring at the glossy blueprints of a high-rise complex overlaid directly on top of our sanctuary. My father would never agree to sell the land. He believes Brad is developing it for the ministry. Agent Vance let out a grim, humorless laugh. Your father is a blind pawn, Captain. Brad fabricated a series of false commercial trust documents that your father foolishly signed without a lawyer present. Pastor Thomas thinks he is signing paperwork for a church expansion, but in reality, he signed over full power of attorney regarding the land title. Brad's plan is completely ruthless. The commercial developer is scheduled to wire $8.5 million directly into Brad's offshore shell account this coming Saturday. The very second that wire clears, Brad has a one-way ticket booked to Dubai. He plans to leave the country with the cash, leaving your father to face a bankrupt congregation, a bulldozed church, and severe federal embezzlement charges for signing away property he did not legally own alone. The sheer monstrosity of Brad's calculation made my stomach churn violently. He was not just trying to get rich. He was actively setting up my father to take the absolute fall for a catastrophic federal crime while he skipped the country with millions. My father was a foolish, status-obsessed man who had treated me like garbage my entire life. But the thought of our ancestral land being paved over while my grandfather's memory was dragged through the mud made my blood run cold. So why haven't you arrested him right now? I demanded, looking Agent Vance dead in the eye. You have the forged papers. You have the stolen identity flag. Why let him walk away from this parking lot today? Agent Vance leaned forward, placing his palms flat on the table. Because right now, Captain, we only have him on attempted document forgery and identity theft. With his family's high-priced defense lawyers, he could post bail by midnight and tie this up in civil court for years while hiding the paper trail. We do not just want to slap his wrist, we want to nail him for full-scale federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and interstate theft. To do that, we need to catch him in the absolute act of receiving that illicit wire transfer. We need the trap to spring the exact second the money hits his account. And how do I fit into this? I asked, narrowing my eyes. Agent Vance pointed directly at my laptop bag resting beside me. When you placed that hard freeze on your active-duty military credit profile an hour ago, you locked down the primary clearinghouse Brad was using to verify his institutional legitimacy. The Miami development firm's bank triggered an automated hold on the wire transfer because your military fraud alert flagged the underlying corporate entity. Brad cannot receive that $8.5 million wire transfer on Saturday unless the fraud flag on your military profile is temporarily cleared. We need you to lift the credit freeze for a precise window of exactly 24 hours. The request hung heavy in the chilled air of the SUV. Lifting the freeze meant temporarily exposing myself to immense financial vulnerability. If the FBI missed their window, or if the legal trap failed my credit, my military standing and my entire life's work would be utterly annihilated. If I lift that freeze, Brad gets the money, I said, my voice hardening. What guarantees do I have that my name and my grandfather's land are protected? You have the full weight of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Agent Vance declared with absolute certainty. The moment that wire enters the clearinghouse at 2 o'clock on Saturday, our cyber division will intercept the funds, freeze the offshore account, and our field team will execute a federal arrest warrant on Bradley Miller. He will not even have time to touch the money. But we cannot trigger the wire without your cooperation. I looked down at the rusted dog tags of Sergeant James Jackson resting in the palm of my hand. My grandfather had fought real enemies in the trenches of Europe, facing down gunfire to protect what belonged to him and his people. I was his blood. I was an Air Force captain. I was not going to cower in the shadows while a parasitic scammer tried to destroy everything my bloodline built. Do it, I said, my decision crystal clear. I will lift the freeze for 24 hours starting Saturday morning. Make sure your handcuffs are ready. Agent Vance nodded with deep respect. Thank you, Captain Jackson. We will be watching his every move. I pushed the heavy SUV door open and stepped out onto the dusty gravel parking lot. The intense afternoon heat hit me like a physical wall, but my mind was completely ice cold. As the black SUV quietly pulled away and disappeared down the street, my cell phone vibrated violently in my back pocket. I pulled it out. It was not an apology from my father. It was not a plea for forgiveness from my mother. It was a text message from Valerie, completely void of any maternal concern, written with the sharp, toxic spite she had cultivated for 30 years. Brad's family is hosting an elite exclusive dinner for Chloe's anniversary this Saturday at 5-Star Prime in downtown Nashville, the text read. His parents are flying in on their private jet, and the entire city high society will be there. Do not show up and embarrass us with your bitter, loud military drama. You have already ruined the cookout. Give Brad back that dog tag immediately. It is a valuable antique that belongs to this family, not you. I stared at the glowing letters on my screen. 5 years ago, a message like that would have sent me into a suffocating spiral of anxiety and self-doubt. I would have drafted a dozen different apologies begging my mother to understand my perspective. I would have handed over my grandfather's dog tags just to keep the peace and avoid being labeled the angry, aggressive black woman of the family. Now I did not feel a single shred of guilt. I tapped the reply box. I did not write an emotional paragraph defending my grandfather's honor or explaining the massive legal federal jeopardy they were currently standing in. I typed a single cold response. Have a great dinner. Be sure to turn on CNN at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday. I hit send and immediately blocked her number for the next 48 hours. Let her choke on the suspense while she picked out her expensive dress. I opened my secure military laptop again, resting it on the hood of my truck in the blazing afternoon heat. Agent Vance had left me with a specific set of encrypted communication protocols. I logged into my secure banking portal and connected a private server link directly to the FBI Cyber Division. Brad thought he was dealing with standard commercial bank tellers who would bow to his aggressive white-collar attitude. I had no idea. He was now engaged in a digital war with federal agents and a military officer who specialized in high-stress combat logistics. Working in tandem with a federal cyber analyst, on the other end of the encrypted chat, we crafted the perfect digital bait. We designed an automated, highly convincing spoof email, perfectly mirroring the corporate communication style of the Miami luxury condominium development firm. The message was routed directly to the primary inbox of Brad's fraudulent investment firm. The text was devastatingly simple but legally binding and designed to keep him trapped in Nashville. Due to an unexpected routine institutional security check regarding the church land title, transfer the final loan disbursement, and the $8.5 million wire transfer have been temporarily delayed. The security hold will automatically clear, and funds will be fully disbursed at exactly 2:05 in the afternoon on Saturday. I watched the delivery confirmation flash across my screen. Brad was going to spend the next 2 days sweating profusely through his tailored suits completely unaware that his impending payday was actually the countdown to his own federal indictment. He would be forced to sit through his elite anniversary dinner playing the rich, successful entrepreneur while internally panicking about the delayed funds. I packed up my laptop and drove straight back to Aunt Beatrice's house. The moment I walked through her front door, the smell of her famous sweet potato pie hit me. It was a sharp, comforting contrast to the toxic hostility I had just navigated at the church cookout. She was sitting in the living room nervously wringing her hands, holding a framed photograph of my grandfather in his World War II uniform. I gave her a firm nod, confirming that the federal trap was fully operational and the land was secure. Beatrice exhaled sharply, her shoulders dropping as years of carrying this family's secrets finally began to lift. I walked into the spare bedroom she had set up for me and pulled my pristine Air Force dress blues uniform from its protective garment bag. I laid the dark blue fabric across the mattress, smoothing out any invisible wrinkles. I meticulously pinned my ribbons and badges to the chest. Every single piece of that uniform represented sacrifice, discipline, and survival in the harshest environments on Earth. My parents had always treated my military career like a masculine embarrassment, a shameful deviation from the perfect submissive suburban housewife script they had written for Chloe. They wanted me hidden in the background, making them look good by staying silent and footing the bill. Instead, I was going to stand under the brightest lights in the nation, wearing the very uniform they despised. I polished my brass insignias until they mirrored my own intensely focused expression. I was not just preparing for a standard military ceremony. I was arming myself for a highly public execution of my family's unearned arrogance. As I was carefully brushing the dust off my uniform shoes, my cell phone vibrated violently against the wooden nightstand. The caller ID displayed a restricted military command number. I snapped to attention, clearing my throat before answering. Captain Jackson speaking. The gruff, authoritative voice of my base commanding officer, Colonel Hayes, boomed through the receiver. Captain Jackson, we have a massive change of plans regarding the schedule for your ceremony this weekend. My grip tightened on the phone. Has the location changed, sir? Negative, Captain. Colonel Hayes replied, his voice brimming with a distinct layer of profound respect I had rarely heard him use. The Secretary of Defense has personally reviewed your grandfather's unredacted service file. He is absolutely furious about the historical oversight and the systemic racism that buried Sergeant Jackson's legacy. The Secretary is flying in, and he is personally presenting your Silver Star. Furthermore, the network news stations caught wind of the retroactive compensation package being tied to a World War II combat veteran. CNN and two other major networks have requested exclusive live coverage of the entire presentation. Your award is going to be broadcast live across the entire country. The colonel paused, the heavy weight of the situation hanging in the air. Does your family know about the live broadcast, Captain? I looked down at the polished silver medals resting on my uniform jacket. I thought about my mother obsessing over the seating chart for an anniversary dinner paid for with stolen money. I thought about Brad demanding my social security number to steal my future. A cold, unapologetic smile spread across my face. No, sir, I replied, my voice echoing with absolute finality. They are going to find out on TV. I ended the secure call with Colonel Hayes and guided Aunt Beatrice toward the tarmac, where a sleek Gulfstream C-37 military transport jet waited exclusively for us. The gleaming white aircraft bore the official seal of the United States Air Force. A sharply dressed flight steward stood at the bottom of the air stairs. He snapped a crisp salute the moment I approached and extended a respectful hand to help Aunt Beatrice up the steps. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, completely unaccustomed to being treated with such high regard. For the last 5 years, my father had made sure she felt like a discarded outcast, an unwanted burden who did not fit into his polished country club aesthetic. Now an active duty service member was addressing her as ma'am and ushering her into a cabin outfitted with plush leather captain chairs, polished mahogany tables, and soft ambient lighting. I settled into the seat across from her and watched as the steward offered her a selection of fresh pastries and sparkling water. Beatrice looked out the window as the jet engines roared to life, wiping a single tear from her cheek. She was finally receiving the honor she deserved, and we had not even reached Washington yet. Once we reached cruising altitude, the steward activated the highly secure military Wi-Fi network for my devices. I had barely connected my tablet when an incoming video call notification flashed across the screen. The caller ID displayed Chloe's name. I considered ignoring it completely, but the strategic part of my brain wanted to see exactly how far my family was willing to dig their own financial grave before the trap snapped shut tomorrow. I tapped the green accept button and propped the tablet on the mahogany table. Chloe's face immediately filled the screen. She was not calling to apologize for the scene at the cookout or to ask about my trip. She was standing in the middle of a brightly lit, aggressively opulent bridal and evening wear boutique in downtown Nashville. She spun around holding her phone high to show off a massive glittering gown covered in thousands of hand-sewn crystals and heavy silk layers. "Maya, look at this!" Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing loudly enough to make the boutique attendants wince in the background. It is an original imported design. $5,000 straight off the runway. Brad's parents are flying in from their estate tonight, and they expect a certain standard from the people their son associates with. Mom and Dad completely emptied their emergency savings accounts this morning to pay for it and the venue deposit. They know we have to look like absolute royalty tomorrow. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold wave of disgust wash over me. My parents had drained their last remaining safety net to buy a piece of fabric for a daughter who did not respect them just to impress a white family that secretly despised them. They were bankrupting themselves to maintain an illusion of wealth while standing on the brink of federal indictment. I kept my face entirely blank, betraying none of the tactical knowledge I held. "Emptying their savings seems a bit reckless for a single anniversary party, Chloe," I said, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "You just do not understand high-level investments," Chloe sneered, stopping her twirl to glare into the camera. "You have to spend money to make money. This dinner is a networking event. Brad's father has incredibly wealthy friends flying in. Mom and Dad are just doing their part to secure our position in their social circle. But I would not expect a single woman playing nurse in combat boots to grasp the concept of elite networking. Speaking of which, where exactly are you right now? Did the military stick you in some roach-infested motel off the highway for your little ribbon ceremony? I bet the air conditioning is broken." I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice or defend my accommodations. I simply reached out and picked up the tablet. I slowly panned the camera lens around the luxurious interior of the VIP transport jet. The high-definition camera captured the rich leather seating, the pristine wood paneling, the expansive cabin space, and the uniformed Air Force steward respectfully standing at attention near the galley. I panned the camera back to Aunt Beatrice, who was comfortably sipping sparkling water from a crystal glass, looking like the matriarch she was born to be. Chloe's mouth fell open. The smug, mocking expression melted right off her face, replaced by utter confusion. Her eyes darted around the screen, trying to comprehend the sheer level of wealth and access she was looking at. "Where are you? Where are you?" Chloe demanded, her voice dropping its haughty edge. "Whose private plane is that? Did you rent that?" I set the tablet back down on the table, centering the frame on my face. "I do not pay for travel, Chloe," I replied smoothly. "The Pentagon handles the logistics when they are preparing to honor someone. Enjoy your dress, though. I am sure it will look stunning under the restaurant lights tomorrow." Before Chloe could formulate a response, the camera violently shook as someone grabbed her phone. Brad's face shoved its way into the frame, pressing close to the lens. His eyes were wild with a frantic, greedy energy. He had clearly been standing nearby listening to the conversation. "Do not try to act superior," Brad barked, pointing a threatening finger at the camera. "You might get a free plane ride today, but tomorrow this entire family is going to be next-level rich. My commercial development deal closes at exactly 2:05 tomorrow afternoon. I am bringing a tidal wave of generational wealth into this house. We are going to buy a private jet just like that one, and we will not need the government's permission to fly it." Brad squinted at the screen, noticing the woman sitting quietly in the background. He let out a harsh, derogatory laugh. "Is that your crazy Aunt Beatrice back there? You brought that broke old bat with you on a free trip. That is pathetic, Maya. You two losers belong together. Keep playing dress-up in your uniforms while the real adults handle the millions." Aunt Beatrice did not flinch at his insult. She just took another calm sip of her water, her eyes locked on mine. She knew exactly what was coming. I looked directly into Brad's arrogant, desperate eyes. I saw the sweat forming on his brow, a clear sign of the immense pressure he was under while waiting for his stolen funds to clear. He was a rat, completely unaware that the cage door had already slammed shut behind him. I offered him a serene, chilling smile. "You are right, Brad," I said, my voice dropping to a soft, lethal whisper. "Tomorrow changes everything." I reached forward and ended the call, plunging the tablet screen into total darkness. The silence in the jet cabin was deeply satisfying. I leaned back into my leather seat and looked out the window at the clouds passing below us. The explosive destruction of my toxic family was already in motion. All I had to do now was wait for the clock to strike. The tires of the military transport jet touched down on the tarmac at Joint Base Andrews with a smooth, controlled landing. A sleek black town car was already waiting for us on the runway. The driver, a uniformed service member, immediately loaded our luggage and navigated us through the evening traffic into the heart of Washington District of Columbia. The Pentagon had spared absolutely no expense for the granddaughter of a forgotten hero. We pulled up to a towering five-star hotel where a concierge team was waiting to personally escort us to the penthouse suite. When the double doors swung open, Aunt Beatrice actually gasped. The suite was a masterpiece of modern luxury with panoramic windows overlooking the illuminated Capitol skyline. A massive dining table was set with fresh fruit and artisan chocolates, accompanied by a handwritten welcome note from the Secretary of Defense. I watched Beatrice run her hand along the velvet upholstery of the sofa. For years, my father had convinced her she was nothing but a poor, crazy old woman who deserved to live in the shadows. Tonight, the United States military was treating her like absolute royalty. I set my tactical bag on the marble counter and began unpacking my uniform, ensuring every medal was perfectly aligned for tomorrow. As I hung my pristine dress blues in the cedar closet, my cell phone vibrated sharply against the marble countertop. I walked over and saw a new audio message from my mother. I had blocked her number earlier, but she had clearly used my father's phone to bypass the restriction. I tapped the screen and pressed the speaker button, allowing Valerie's sharp, haughty voice to fill the quiet elegance of the penthouse suite. "Maya, I am leaving this message, because I know you will try to call your father tomorrow, looking for a handout or a last-minute apology." Valerie began, her tone dripping with unearned superiority. "Do not even think about dialing this number. Thomas will be incredibly busy rubbing elbows with Brad's wealthy investor parents. We are hosting the absolute elite of Nashville society, and we cannot have our phones ringing with your drama. I also want to make this perfectly clear, since you seem so confused about your place in this family. Your entire military career is nothing but a masculine embarrassment to us. You parrot around in those stiff uniforms trying to act tough while Chloe actually did what a real woman is supposed to do. She secured a high-value husband and built a respectable life. You are 30 years old playing war games in the dirt. Stay away from our phones tomorrow, Maya. We are finally entering the upper class and you are not invited." The voice note ended with a harsh electronic click. I did not feel a single ounce of anger toward my mother anymore. You cannot be angry at a person who is about to willingly walk into a federal prison. But the sound of a heavy, stifled sob caught my attention. I turned to see Aunt Beatrice standing in the center of the living room, clutching a small embroidered handkerchief to her chest. Tears were streaming freely down her weathered cheeks. She had heard every single word of that toxic recording. Beatrice sank onto the edge of the velvet sofa, her shoulders shaking under the weight of decades of emotional abuse. "Thomas traded his very soul for the illusion of status." Beatrice wept, her voice cracking with profound grief. "He sold out our father. He sold out the church our people built with their bare hands. He sold out his own brilliant daughter, all for a fleeting chance to sit at a dinner table with a white con artist who despises him. He threw away everything real just to wear a cheap crown." I walked over and knelt directly in front of her, taking her trembling hands in mine. I looked up into her tear-filled eyes, projecting every ounce of strength and certainty I possessed. "He did trade his soul, Aunt Beatrice," I said softly but firmly. "And tomorrow afternoon he is going to collect the exact paycheck he earned for that trade. You have spent your entire life protecting my grandfather's memory while Thomas tried to bury it. You took the insults. You took the banishment. You took the shame they tried to force on you. But tomorrow, the entire world is going to find out exactly who the real disgrace of the Jackson family is. I squeezed her hands tightly. Tomorrow, you are going to stand on a national stage, and the federal government is going to validate your worth, your loyalty, and your sacrifice. They are going to hand you back everything Thomas tried to steal, and they are going to do it on live television. Beatrice let out a shaky breath, nodding slowly as my words registered. She wiped her eyes, sitting up straighter, and lifting her chin with a renewed sense of dignity. She was ready. I stood up and guided her toward the master bedroom, ensuring she had everything she needed to rest before the monumental day ahead. I needed her sharp and focused for the cameras. Once she was settled, I walked back out to the main living area and poured myself a glass of ice water. The city lights of Washington glowed brightly through the floor-to-ceiling windows, mirroring the electric anticipation buzzing in my veins. The trap was fully constructed. The bait had been taken. The players were all moving exactly where I needed them to be. Suddenly, the encrypted FBI application installed on my secondary mobile device emitted a sharp dual-tone ping. It was a secure direct-channel notification from Special Agent Vance. I set my glass down on the counter and unlocked the screen. The text was brief, tactical, and utterly devastating. Trap is set. The wire transfer is queued for 2:05 tomorrow afternoon. The Miami clearinghouse is locked and ready to intercept. SWAT team is on standby near the restaurant in Nashville. Sleep well, Captain. I read the message twice, committing the timeline to memory. 2:05 in the afternoon. My family was planning to toast to their brand new wealth at that exact moment. They were planning to clink champagne glasses and celebrate the destruction of my grandfather's church. I deleted the secure message, clearing the digital cache immediately to maintain operational security. I looked back out at the glowing skyline of the Capitol. I was not going to sleep well tonight. I was not going to sleep at all. I was simply going to watch the clock count down the final hours of the Jackson family charade. My mother thought I was a masculine embarrassment playing war games. Tomorrow I was going to show her exactly how a military officer executes a flawless, undeniable strike on an enemy target. Saturday arrived with the absolute precision of a coordinated military strike. At exactly 1:30 in the afternoon, the grand auditorium inside the Pentagon hummed with an intense electric energy. The room was packed wall to wall with four-star generals, foreign dignitaries, and high-ranking government officials. The polished marble floors reflected the harsh, bright lights of the National Press Corps. Major network cameras were positioned at every possible angle, capturing the magnitude of a historic wrong finally being made right. I stood near the front of the stage wearing my pristine Air Force dress blues. The dark, heavy fabric felt like a second skin, an armor designed for the exact battle I was about to fight. My posture was rigid, my chin held high, and my expression completely unreadable. The heavy silver medals pinned to my chest caught the bright television lights, but they were nothing compared to the quiet, formidable dignity of Aunt Beatrice sitting in the front row. She wore a beautifully tailored deep navy suit, her silver hair styled immaculately. After years of being treated like a disposable burden by her own brother, she was now sitting shoulder to shoulder with the most powerful military leaders in the free world. We were surrounded by genuine power and absolute respect. Hundreds of miles away in downtown Nashville, the scene could not have been more drastically different. Inside the hyper-luxurious private dining room of Prime Restaurant, the atmosphere was suffocatingly pretentious. The heavy scent of roasted truffles and overpriced vintage champagne filled the enclosed space. The room was dripping with the kind of ostentatious wealth that tried far too hard to prove it belonged. Chloe was parading around the private room, twirling in her $5,000 designer gown, desperate to capture the attention of Brad's snobby, wealthy white parents. My mother Valerie sat at the edge of her plush velvet seat, beaming with a manic, desperate energy. She was practically vibrating with the need to be accepted by this elite social circle, completely oblivious to the fact that she had bankrupted her own future to buy a seat at this table. My father, Pastor Thomas Jackson, sat across from them wearing a tailored tuxedo he could not actually afford. The man who was supposed to be the spiritual and moral leader of our African American community was instead shrinking himself down, trying to occupy as little space as possible in the presence of Brad's father. But the most telling detail in the room was Brad himself. He was not celebrating. He was drowning in his own hidden panic. Brad sat stiffly at the head of the table, a thin layer of cold sweat glistening on his pale forehead. His eyes darted frantically around the room, and his fingers tapped a restless, erratic rhythm against his crystal champagne flute. He kept pulling back the cuff of his expensive jacket to check his gold watch. It was approaching 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I knew the massive $8.5 million wire transfer from the luxury condo developers was scheduled to clear his offshore account at exactly 2:05. He was 5 minutes away from either becoming a millionaire or becoming a federal fugitive, and the pressure was visibly eating him alive from the inside out. Brad's father, a stern-looking man with a perpetual scowl of superiority, swirled the champagne in his glass and cleared his throat loudly. The entire table immediately fell silent, eager to hear whatever profound wisdom the wealthy patriarch was about to drop. "It is truly generous of you, Bradley, to elevate your wife's family from their modest background," his father announced, his voice booming with a condescending arrogance that made my stomach turn just imagining it. "Bringing them into our sphere of generational wealth and showing them how real business is conducted is quite the charitable endeavor. It is not every day you see someone reach down and pull their in-laws out of the trenches." The racial hostility and blatant disrespect laced within those words were undeniable. It was a direct insult to everything my grandfather had built and everything our family had fought for. Yet instead of standing up and defending his dignity, my father, Pastor Thomas Jackson, simply bowed his head in pathetic subservience. He offered a weak, grateful smile, acting as if he had just been handed a massive compliment. "Thank you, Sir Thomas," replied, his voice dripping with submission. "We are incredibly blessed to have Brad guiding our financial future. He is truly a savior to our community." Valerie beamed brightly next to him, completely oblivious to the degrading insult that had just been hurled right in their faces. She clapped her hands together, thrilled just to be acknowledged by the wealthy white man sitting across from her. They were willingly trading their pride, their heritage, and their sacred church land for a handful of empty compliments. Just outside the open double doors of their private dining room, a restaurant bartender was polishing glasses while watching the massive flat-screen television mounted above the bar. A loud, sharp notification chime echoed from the television, cutting through the low murmur of the restaurant. The bartender immediately stopped polishing and reached for the remote control, turning the volume up significantly. The bright red banner of a CNN breaking news alert flashed across the screen, catching the attention of everyone in the surrounding area. The sharp, authoritative voice of the CNN anchor filled the air, bridging the physical distance between the Pentagon and the Nashville restaurant. "We go live now to the Pentagon, where history is about to be made," the anchor announced clearly. The camera panned across the sea of decorated generals and settled directly on the podium where the top brass stood waiting. Valerie let out a loud, annoyed scoff, rolling her eyes in dramatic fashion. "Turn that military garbage off right now," Valerie shouted toward the bartender, waving her hand dismissively. "We are hosting a highly exclusive private anniversary event, and we do not need to be subjected to depressing war propaganda while we eat. It ruins the entire elegant aesthetic we paid for." The bartender reached to mute the television, but Brad's father suddenly held up a commanding hand, stopping him in his tracks. "Leave it on," Brad's father ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I served in the armed forces, and I have several close associates currently stationed at the Pentagon. I want to see what historic event is happening today." The entire table immediately froze, forced into absolute silence by the patriarch's command. Valerie swallowed her complaints and plastered on a fake smile, nodding eagerly in agreement. Brad wiped the sweat from his forehead, checking his gold watch one more time. It was exactly 2 o'clock. He turned his eyes toward the television screen, completely unaware that the military broadcast he was about to watch was the exact same event that was going to permanently destroy his entire life. The high-definition camera panned slowly across the expansive Pentagon auditorium, capturing the rich, vivid colors of the military flags and the polished, shining brass of the military band. The broadcast displayed a stunning level of absolute solemnity and national respect that instantly commanded the undivided attention of every single patron inside the busy Nashville restaurant. The large television screen transitioned from the wide overhead shot of the massive stage and began a slow, deliberate sweep across the front row of the audience. The digital graphic on the very bottom of the screen explicitly labeled this section as honored guests and distinguished families. Inside the private dining room, Valerie was holding a crystal champagne flute halfway to her mouth, ready to boast about her wealthy connections and the elite status she felt she finally achieved. She looked up at the massive flat-screen television, expecting to see empty seats where she and Thomas were supposed to be sitting. She expected the national broadcast to highlight Maya sitting alone, looking abandoned and pathetic, without her family there to support her. Instead, the camera settled on a specific velvet-lined chair, right in the center of the VIP section. Sitting in that chair was not an empty space, and it certainly was not a pathetic sight. It was a woman radiating pure, undeniable authority. Valerie opened her mouth to speak, but her fingers suddenly went entirely numb. The crystal champagne flute slipped directly from her manicured hand. The glass plummeted toward the floor and shattered violently against the expensive hardwood of the private dining room. Cold, expensive champagne splashed wildly across the bottom of Chloe's $5,000 designer gown. Chloe shrieked in horror, jumping back from the puddle, but Valerie did not even blink. She did not apologize or rush to grab a napkin. Valerie stood frozen in absolute terror, staring at the television screen as if she had just seen a ghost walk out of a grave. The woman sitting on the national broadcast was wearing a custom-tailored deep navy suit that projected quiet power and immense wealth. Her silver hair was styled immaculately, framing a face that held decades of hard-earned wisdom and uncompromising dignity. She was seated directly next to the United States Secretary of Defense, sharing a polite, respectful nod with a four-star general sitting to her right. It was Aunt Beatrice, the exact same woman Valerie and Thomas had thrown out onto the street, the woman they had deliberately isolated and slandered to steal the family narrative. Thomas gripped the heavy wooden edge of the dining table so hard his knuckles turned stark white against his dark skin. He began to hyperventilate, his chest heaving under his rented tuxedo jacket. His breath hitched violently in his throat as his eyes widened in sheer panic. "What is Beatrice doing there?" Thomas hissed, his voice a frantic, terrified whisper that cut sharply through the sudden dead silence of the private dining room. "She is a nobody. She is a broke, crazy old woman. She has absolutely no business being in that room with those people." Across the table, Brad's snobby white parents exchanged highly confused and deeply disgusted glances. The illusion of the perfect, respectable black family they were supposedly elevating was cracking right in front of their eyes. Brad's mother leaned forward, her brow furrowed in severe judgment. "Thomas, is that the unstable, crazy aunt you warned us about?" she demanded, her tone dripping with elite condescension. "Why on earth is the United States military treating a mentally unstable, destitute woman like she is absolute royalty?" Thomas could not formulate a single coherent answer. The walls of the luxurious dining room were rapidly closing in on him, crushing the fake reality he had spent years building. He knew exactly what he had done to the church deed, and he knew Beatrice had access to the basement. Seeing his discarded sister sitting shoulder to shoulder with the highest levels of the federal government shattered every lie he had ever told himself about his own superiority. Beside him, Brad tugged aggressively at his tight shirt collar. Brad looked frantically from the television screen to his gold watch, and then back to the television. The sudden, unexplainable delay in his massive wire transfer was suddenly feeling highly suspicious and terrifyingly coordinated. On the television screen, the military band finished playing a brief marching anthem. The Secretary of Defense stepped up to the heavy wooden podium, centering himself behind the microphone. The entire Pentagon auditorium fell dead silent, showcasing a profound level of respect that no amount of stolen money could ever buy. The secretary leaned into the microphone, and his deep, authoritative voice boomed through the high-quality speakers mounted in the Nashville restaurant. "We are gathered here today to honor unparalleled bravery," he announced. "Will Captain Maya Jackson please come forward?" Maya stepped into the television frame from the right side of the stage. Her posture was absolutely flawless. The sharp, clean lines of her Air Force dress blues contrasted powerfully against the bright lights. She walked to the center of the stage, moving with a lethal, confident grace that commanded the entire room. She stopped beside the Secretary of Defense and executed a sharp, perfect salute. The camera operator pushed in for a very tight, high-definition close-up of her face, filling the entire television screen in the Nashville restaurant with her image. Maya did not look at the row of decorated generals sitting silently right behind her. She did not look at the loud, cheering crowd. She turned her head very slowly and looked directly into the center of the broadcast camera lens. Her dark eyes were completely cold, calculating, and merciless. The live broadcast beamed that intense, unyielding stare straight into the private dining room. To Thomas, sitting paralyzed in his chair, it felt as though Maya was reaching right through the television screen and piercing directly into his guilty, terrified soul. A booming voice echoed across the massive Pentagon auditorium and transmitted perfectly through the high-definition television speakers in Nashville. The military official stepped up to the podium to read the official combat citation. He described the unbearable heat of the combat zone and the sudden devastating ambush that trapped an entire medical squad under heavy enemy fire. The official detailed how Captain Maya Jackson completely ignored the evacuation order. She abandoned the relative safety of her armored transport and ran directly into a storm of live ammunition. She dragged 3 critically wounded soldiers across the burning sand, shielding their bleeding bodies with her own tactical gear until the medevac helicopter could safely extract them. She refused any medical attention for her own injuries until every single member of her squad was secure and breathing. Inside the luxurious private dining room in Nashville, the suffocating pretension instantly evaporated. The wealthy patrons at the nearby tables, the servers holding expensive bottles of wine, and the bartenders wiping down the counters all stopped moving. A heavy, absolute silence fell over the entire establishment. Brad's snobby parents sat completely frozen in their velvet chairs, their jaws parted slightly in sheer awe of the genuine, undeniable heroism radiating from the television screen. They had spent the entire afternoon bragging about elite country club connections and high society wealth. Now they were forced to watch a black woman display a level of raw bravery and physical sacrifice they could not even begin to comprehend. Chloe looked down at her lap. Her hands were shaking violently. She stared at her $5,000 designer gown. The heavy imported silk and the thousands of hand-sewn crystals suddenly looked like a cheap, pathetic Halloween costume. Chloe shifted uncomfortably in her seat, turning a sickly shade of green. She looked around the room and saw everyone entirely captivated by her older sister. Chloe realized in real time that no amount of stolen church money or elite networking would ever buy the level of profound national respect her sister was commanding at this exact second. Her lavish anniversary party, the event her parents bankrupted themselves to throw, was rendered completely meaningless in the shadow of true honor. Back on the live national broadcast, the Secretary of Defense approached me on the stage. He held the heavy silver medal in his hands. He pinned the silver star firmly to the crisp fabric of my dark blue uniform jacket. He took a step back and rendered a crisp, sharp salute. I returned the salute with perfect military precision. The crowd of decorated generals and foreign dignitaries erupted into a thunderous standing ovation. The applause shook the walls of the auditorium. I did not smile. I did not wave to the cameras or soak in the adoration. I maintained my rigid posture, keeping my focus entirely locked on the mission at hand. When the massive wave of applause finally settled, the Secretary of Defense did something highly unusual for a standard military pinning ceremony. He did not step back to conclude the event. He did not ask the band to play the closing anthem. Instead, he reached forward and removed the microphone from the heavy wooden podium. He turned and handed the microphone directly to me. I gripped the cool metal of the microphone. I looked past the bright studio lights and stared directly into the main broadcast camera. I knew my father was watching. I knew Brad was sweating. I knew my mother was paralyzed with shock. The entire Pentagon auditorium held its collective breath, waiting for me to speak. I accept this honor, not for myself, I stated. My voice rang out through the speakers with quiet, lethal precision. It cut through the silence like a sharpened combat blade. I stand here today to correct a massive historical injustice against a man who was intentionally denied his rightful glory simply because of the color of his skin. I am not the hero of the Jackson family. I accept this medal today strictly on behalf of my grandfather, Sergeant James Jackson. In the Nashville restaurant, Pastor Thomas Jackson violently grabbed the thick wooden edge of the dining table. The heavy table shook slightly under his frantic grip. His knuckles popped from the extreme pressure he was applying. His heart hammered wildly against his ribcage. He knew exactly what he did to James Jackson's legacy. I knew about the forged signatures, the fake commercial trust documents, and the secret collateral transfer. He handed over to a white con artist, just to feel important for one afternoon. He had traded his own father's blood and sacrifice for a seat at a table with people who openly despised him. The cold sweat dripping down his neck felt like a physical manifestation of his intense, overwhelming guilt. He wanted to look away from the television, but he was completely paralyzed by the unfolding disaster. On the television screen, I took a slow, deliberate breath. I did not break eye contact with the camera lens. I needed my father to feel the absolute weight of his betrayal crashing down on his shoulders before the federal trap officially snapped shut. I leaned closer to the microphone, letting my words echo into millions of living rooms across the entire country. It is a legacy, built on blood, and ultimate sacrifice. I continued, my voice echoing with an uncompromising authority that commanded the attention of every single person watching. A legacy that some have recently tried to erase and sell for scraps. 80 years ago, Sergeant James Jackson served his country in the European theater. My voice was steady, projecting across the massive auditorium and through the national broadcast, ensuring every single syllable landed with absolute undeniable force. During a devastating ambush in the bitter cold of winter, my grandfather single-handedly defended a compromised position. I held off advancing enemy forces for 12 grueling hours, providing covering fire, so his entire trapped platoon could safely retreat. He bled for this nation. He took shrapnel to his chest and carried the physical scars until the day he died. But when he returned home, the country he fought for refused to pin a medal on his chest. Because of the color of his skin, his commanding officers buried his combat reports. They stripped him of his military merits, erased his unparalleled bravery from the official records, and sent him back to a segregated society with nothing but a dishonorable fraction of his earned pension. He did not let their systemic hatred break him. I stared directly into the broadcast camera, knowing exactly who was sitting frozen on the other side of that lens. He came back to his community, pooled the meager wages he earned from breaking his back in manual labor, and bought a plot of land. On that land, he built the Ebenezer Baptist Church. He built a sanctuary where our people could find strength, organize for their civil rights, connect with one another in absolute peace, and finally build a genuine, lasting legacy. He secured that land in a trust intending for it to be a permanent, unshakable foundation for generations of Black families to come. A low murmur of profound respect swept through the crowd of decorated generals and dignitaries in the Pentagon. But the real devastation was unfolding hundreds of miles away in that pretentious, hyper-luxurious private dining room in Nashville. While researching military archives to restore his stolen honors, I uncovered something else. I continued, my tone shifting into a sharp, lethal blade. I uncovered the federal status of the land my grandfather purchased. Because of his restored combat records and the historical significance of the sanctuary, he constructed the United States government officially designated the Ebenezer Baptist Church property as a protected federal heritage site. That designation carries absolute legal weight. The land simply cannot ever be zoned for commercial development. It cannot be legally transferred to private corporate holdings, and it absolutely cannot be bulldozed to build luxury condominiums. It is completely, permanently untouchable. Inside the Nashville restaurant, a harsh, violent coughing fit shattered the tense silence of the private dining room. Brad violently choked on his expensive vintage champagne. He spat the golden liquid across the pristine white tablecloth, his hands flying to his throat as he gasped for air. His pale, sweaty face turned an alarming dark shade of deep crimson. The smug, arrogant confidence he had been parading around all afternoon completely evaporated in a single second. The land was untouchable. The commercial deeds, he had forged the collateral, he had presented to the Miami developers. The entire foundation of his massive financial scheme was legally worthless. He had sold them a protected federal landmark. "What is wrong with you?" Chloe shrieked, jumping back to protect her ridiculous $5,000 designer gown from Brad's sputtering mess. Brad ignored his wife entirely. His chest was heaving with pure, unadulterated panic. The high society white parents he had been trying to impress stared at him with mounting disgust and deep confusion. Brad frantically reached his trembling right hand into the hidden inner pocket of his very expensive tailored jacket and pulled out his cell phone. His hands were shaking so violently he nearly dropped the device onto the floor. He unlocked the screen and desperately opened his secure banking application. He needed to cancel the incoming wire transfer immediately. If the Miami developers wired $8.5 million into his account for a fraudulent, legally impossible land sale, he was not just looking at a defaulted loan, he was looking at a massive, undeniable charge of federal wire fraud. He jabbed his thumb against the cancel transaction button, his eyes wide with sheer terror. Nothing happened. The banking application screen froze. A small blue loading circle appeared in the center of the screen, spinning endlessly in a mocking, hypnotic loop. Brad tapped the screen again, harder this time. Cancel. Cancel the transaction. The blue circle just kept spinning. He did not know that federal cyber agents had already locked his digital access. He did not know that he was entirely sealed inside the trap. He stared at the spinning circle, the horrifying realization washing over him like a bucket of ice water. He was completely trapped. Beside him, Pastor Thomas Jackson sat paralyzed in his velvet chair. The pastor was not looking at Brad. He was staring blankly at the television screen, his breathing shallow and rapid. Thomas had forged his own father's signature to hand that church over to Brad. He had facilitated the entire fraud, assuming the developer's money would cover his tracks and elevate his social status. Now the entire nation knew the land was a federal heritage site. His betrayed congregation would soon know. The federal authorities would definitely know. I did not break my composure on the Pentagon stage. I let the weight of my grandfather's vindication settle over the auditorium. The Secretary of Defense stood nearby, nodding in solemn agreement with my words. I turned my attention away from the broadcast camera and looked directly toward the front row of the VIP section. For decades, my grandfather's name was buried by prejudice, and his assets were targeted by the greedy and the corrupt. I announced, my voice carrying a triumphant, undeniable finality. But today, the United States government corrects its historical mistake. I invite my grandfather's sole legal designated heir, the woman who never once stopped fighting for his truth, Beatrice Jackson, to the stage. Aunt Beatrice stepped out from the wings of the grand auditorium. She moved with a slow, measured grace, her head held high, despite the tears streaming freely down her face. For decades, she had been the outcast of the Jackson family, the woman ridiculed and discarded simply because she refused to participate in my father's shallow pursuit of high society status. She had lived in a modest home, pinching pennies while guarding the sacred truth of her father's service and enduring the harsh judgment of her own flesh and blood. Now she was walking across the polished stage of the Pentagon, bathed in the blinding light of national television cameras. The four-star generals in the front row stood at attention as she approached the center of the platform. The Secretary of Defense stepped forward, his expression filled with profound reverence. He held a small, polished mahogany box in his hands. He opened the lid, revealing the highest military decoration awarded by the United States government. The Medal of Honor rested against the dark velvet gleaming under the studio lights. The secretary gently lifted the heavy gold medal and draped the blue ribbon around Aunt Beatrice's neck. The auditorium remained completely silent, honoring the immense weight of a sacrifice that had been buried by prejudice for 80 years. Beatrice placed her trembling hand over the medal resting against her chest, closing her eyes as she finally felt the validation she had fought her entire life to secure. But the United States government was not finished correcting its historical failure. Two military aides dressed in immaculate uniforms walked onto the stage carrying a massive ceremonial presentation check. They stood directly behind Aunt Beatrice holding the oversized board for the entire world to see. The smooth, professional voice of the CNN news anchor cut through the broadcast, echoing loudly from the television speakers inside the Nashville restaurant. The anchor provided the stunning context to the millions of viewers watching from their living rooms. In a truly unprecedented move, the Department of Defense is not only restoring Sergeant Jackson's military honors, but is also issuing a full retroactive pension and combat compensation payout. Because the original records were deliberately suppressed due to systemic racial discrimination, the federal government has calculated 80 years of back pay interest and punitive damages. A payout totaling exactly $4.2 million is being awarded today directly to his sole legal designated heir. Inside the luxurious private dining room in Nashville, the stifling silence shattered into absolute chaotic madness. Valerie leaped out of her plush velvet chair, knocking over her untouched plate of expensive caviar. Her eyes bulged wildly as she stared at the television screen, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated greed and fury. "That is our money!" Valerie screamed at the top of her lungs, completely abandoning her carefully crafted high society persona. "Thomas is his son. Thomas is the pastor of that church. She has no right to that payout. We are the ones who deserve that check. We need that money to pay for Chloe's lifestyle. Call the network right now, Thomas. Tell them they made a mistake." Thomas did not reach for his cell phone. He did not stand up to demand his rightful share. He sank heavily into his chair, his body collapsing like a deflated balloon. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and physically ill. He stared blankly at the polished hardwood floor, unable to even look at the television screen displaying his sister's triumph. "I cannot call them," Thomas whispered, his voice shaking so violently he could barely form the words. "I cannot claim a single penny of that money, Valerie." "What are you talking about?" Valerie shrieked, grabbing his tuxedo shoulder and shaking him aggressively. "You are his flesh and blood. You are the head of the Jackson family." Thomas let out a ragged, desperate gasp, struggling to pull oxygen into his lungs. 10 years ago, when the church land started appreciating in value, I wanted to avoid paying the heavy property taxes. Thomas confessed, his eyes wide with the horrifying realization of his own fatal hubris. "I went behind Beatrice's back and legally removed my name from the familial trust to dodge the IRS. I thought I could just forge the deed later when I needed to leverage the land. I forged the church deed to give to Brad because I had zero legal rights to the property anymore. By trying to cheat the tax system, I accidentally made Beatrice the absolute sole legal heir to everything my father ever owned. She is the only one legally entitled to that $4 million. I locked myself out of my own inheritance." Valerie let out a high-pitched wail of pure devastation. She stumbled backward, realizing that her husband had not only traded away their legacy, but had completely bungled the paperwork, ensuring they would never see a single dime of the federal payout. Chloe sat frozen in her $5,000 designer gown, watching her parents realize they were completely bankrupt. The wealthy white in-laws sitting across the table looked at Thomas with undisguised disgust, disgusted not by his greed, but by his sheer incompetence. At the head of the table, Brad was entirely detached from the family drama erupting around him. He did not care about the retroactive pension or the military medal. He only cared about his own survival. The heavy gold watch on his wrist ticked methodically. The second hand swept past the 12. The digital clock on his cell phone officially struck 2:05 in the afternoon. Brad stared at the banking application on his phone screen. The blue loading circle finally stopped spinning. A sharp, loud notification chime echoed from his device, cutting through Valerie's hysterical sobbing. Brad looked down at the screen, expecting to see the glorious confirmation of an $8.5 million wire transfer from the Miami developers. He expected to see the funds that would buy his one-way ticket to Dubai and secure his escape from this catastrophic mess. Instead, a stark red banner flashed across his banking portal. "Account frozen by order of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Suspected wire fraud. Please contact your local field office." A sick, pale expression washed over Brad's face. The blood rushed from his head, leaving him dizzy and nauseous. The heavy, expensive meal he just ate turned like lead in his stomach. His lungs seized up, refusing to take in air, as his heart hammered a frantic, desperate rhythm against his ribs. He realized with absolute terrifying clarity that there was no technical glitch. There was no routine institutional security check causing a minor delay. The delayed wire transfer was an expertly fabricated illusion. It was a digital cage designed specifically to keep him sitting comfortably in this restaurant until the federal trap was perfectly primed. Maya had not just blocked his loan application to be spiteful. She had engineered his total criminal destruction from a military laptop and timed it to the exact second. Brad slowly lifted his heavy head, his neck turning rigidly toward the large glass windows at the front entrance of the exclusive Nashville restaurant. He looked past the velvet ropes, the elegant host stand, and the luxury cars parked closely by the valet. 4 unmarked police cruisers and 2 heavily armored tactical vans had just silently pulled up outside the glass windows, blocking every single possible avenue of escape. The bright red and blue emergency lights suddenly began to flash silently, painting the elegant restaurant walls in a chaotic, relentless strobe of impending federal justice. Brad scrambled backwards so fast his velvet chair tipped over and crashed loudly against the hardwood floor. The sheer terror in his eyes was absolute and undeniable. He did not look at his wife Chloe or attempt to protect her from the fallout. He did not look at his wealthy parents for help or guidance. He just turned his back on his entire fabricated life and made a desperate, pathetic sprint toward the swinging doors of the restaurant kitchen, hoping to slip out through the service alley and disappear into the city. He shoved a young waiter completely out of his way, sending a heavy silver tray of expensive appetizers flying into the air and crashing down onto the pristine marble tiles. Before Brad could even reach the brass handle of the kitchen door, the heavy service entrance was violently kicked open from the other side. 3 massive federal agents dressed in full dark green tactical gear stepped directly into his path, blocking the exit completely. At the exact same moment, the main glass doors of the luxurious restaurant were pulled open by 4 more agents, who swarmed the private dining area with aggressive precision. Their heavy combat boots stomped across the expensive carpets, instantly destroying the elite, quiet atmosphere of the establishment. "Bradley Miller, you are under arrest," the lead agent yelled, his voice booming with undeniable federal authority that silenced the entire room. "You are being charged with federal wire fraud, identity theft, and attempted embezzlement. Get your hands behind your back right now and drop to your knees." Brad froze in his tracks, his chest heaving rapidly as the tactical agents advanced on him. An agent spun him around roughly and slammed his wrists together, securing them in cold steel handcuffs. The sharp click of the metal echoed loudly across the dining room, sealing his fate. Every single wealthy patron in the restaurant had stopped eating to stare at the humiliating spectacle. Brad looked absolutely pathetic. His expensive tailored suit was rumpled, and tears of genuine panic were streaming down his pale, sweaty face. His high society white parents jumped out of their seats in absolute horror. Their faces were pale masks of disgust and utter self-preservation. They did not rush forward to help their son or demand to see a warrant. They immediately began doing damage control for their own reputation. "We have absolutely nothing to do with him," his father shouted, waving his hands frantically in the air to distance himself from his own flesh and blood. "He does not represent our family or our investment firm in any capacity. We cut financial ties with him months ago because of his erratic behavior. Do not associate us with this criminal." They threw him to the wolves, instantly proving that their loyalty only extended as far as their public image. Chloe completely lost her mind as she watched the scene unfold. The grand illusion of her perfect, wealthy marriage was shattering right in front of her eyes, and the local elite were watching every single second of it happen. She let out a piercing, hysterical shriek and lunged forward toward the center of the room. Her heavy $5,000 designer gown caught on the overturned dining chairs, causing her to stumble awkwardly. "Brad," she screamed, reaching her hands out to grab his expensive suit jacket. "What is happening right now, Brad? Tell them they are making a massive mistake. You are supposed to be a millionaire today. You promised me we were buying a private jet today." A female federal agent stepped smoothly in front of Chloe, intercepting her path. The agent placed a firm, flat hand against Chloe and pushed her back without an ounce of sympathy or hesitation. "Step back right now," the agent ordered sternly. "Your husband is currently in federal custody, and interfering with an active arrest will get you placed in handcuffs right next to him." Chloe collapsed onto her knees in the middle of the ruined dining room, sobbing loudly as the agents marched Brad toward the front doors and out to the waiting police cruisers. Pastor Thomas Jackson sat completely frozen at the ruined dining table, his heart racing dangerously fast. He watched his golden son-in-law get paraded through the center of the restaurant like a common street criminal. The community savior he had praised at the Sunday cookout was a complete fraud, who was now crying pathetic tears in front of the entire city. Thomas prayed silently, hoping the agents would just walk out the glass doors and take the nightmare away with them so he could somehow salvage his own reputation. But the lead federal agent did not follow Brad out to the cruisers. Instead, the agent turned slowly and walked directly over to the private dining table. He stopped right in front of Thomas, looking down at the pastor with a cold, measuring stare that made the air leave the room. "Thomas Jackson," the agent said, his voice carrying clearly over Chloe, continuing to sob on the floor. "We strongly suggest you retain legal counsel immediately. You are officially listed as a primary co-conspirator on the forged commercial deed for the Ebenezer Baptist Church property. Expect federal financial investigators at your front door by Monday morning." Thomas let out a choked, desperate gasp, clutching his left hand tightly over his chest as a sharp, agonizing pain shot through his body. His entire religious and social empire was collapsing into dust right before his eyes. Beside him, Valerie was trembling violently, her teeth chattering in shock. Her perfect makeup was smeared with tears, and her high society dreams were completely dead. She reached into her expensive clutch and pulled out her cell phone. Her hands were shaking so erratically she could barely unlock the digital screen. She scrolled frantically through her contact list, looking for the one person who could possibly save them from total destruction. She found it and dialed Maya. The heavy oak door of the Pentagon private green room clicked shut behind me, sealing out the chaotic noise of the press corps and the congratulatory applause of the military officials. I stood in the center of the impeccably decorated space, surrounded by rich mahogany furniture and oil paintings of historical military figures. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady rhythm, providing a sharp contrast to the scorching heat of the combat zones I had survived and the blazing inferno of the family drama I had just detonated. I looked down at my hands and slowly began to peel off my pristine white ceremonial gloves. I pulled the fabric down, finger by finger, executing the simple motion with the same deliberate calm I used when dismantling a complex medical trauma kit. I folded the white gloves neatly and placed them on the edge of the polished coffee table right next to my personal cell phone. The device was currently vibrating so violently, it was slowly inching its way across the smooth wooden surface. It had been vibrating non-stop since the exact moment the Secretary of Defense handed the microphone over to me on that stage. I walked over to the leather armchair, sank into the plush cushions, and simply stared at the glowing screen. The notifications were stacking up faster than the digital processor could handle. 10 missed calls. My father's name flashed across the glass, displaying the frantic desperation of a man who just watched his entire fraudulent empire crumble on national television. 15 missed calls. My mother's contact photo illuminated the room, signaling the absolute destruction of her carefully curated high society facade. 30 missed calls. The screen began to dim slightly as the battery strained under the sheer volume of the incoming panic. I did not reach for the device. I leaned back into the leather chair, letting the heavy silver metal pinned to my chest rest comfortably against my heart. I took a slow, deep breath of the crisp, air-conditioned room and watched the missed call counter climb higher and higher. 42 missed calls. Chloe was likely dialing frantically between violent sobbing fits on the floor of that hyper-luxurious Nashville restaurant. 50 missed calls. The sheer, unadulterated power trip of making them wait was intoxicating. For 30 years, I had been expected to jump at their every command, to bend over backward for their approval, to shrink myself down so they could stand tall. Now they were trapped in a public nightmare of their own making, and I was forcing them to drown in the suspense. 57 missed calls. The digital counter rolled over one more time. Call 58 began to vibrate aggressively against the mahogany wood. I reached out with a steady hand and picked up the device. I tapped the green accept button, holding the phone a few inches away from my ear. I did not say hello. I did not offer a single word of comfort or greeting. Maya, you need to fix this right this instant, my father Thomas screamed into the receiver. His voice was completely stripped of his usual arrogant pastoral authority. He sounded like a terrified, cornered animal howling into the wind. His breath was ragged and sharp, echoing with the sheer panic of a man staring down the barrel of a federal indictment. You need to march right back out onto that stage and tell those military generals they made a massive clerical error. Tell them the paperwork got mixed up. Beatrice cannot have that $4 million, Maya. She is a crazy old woman who has absolutely no idea how to handle real wealth. That money belongs to this family. I sat in the leather chair listening to him hyperventilate. He was still trying to give orders. He was still trying to manipulate reality to serve his own greed. Brad is in handcuffs! Maya Thomas shrieked, his pitch rising to a frantic, hysterical level. Federal agents just stormed into the restaurant and slammed him against a dining table. They are accusing him of wire fraud and identity theft, and they just told me I need a lawyer. You have to bail him out right now. You are an officer. You have clearance. Call the FBI and tell them Brad had your permission to use your name. Tell them it was all a big family misunderstanding. You have to save us, Maya. Through the receiver, I could hear the absolute chaotic destruction unfolding in the background. The wailing sirens of multiple police cruisers pierced through the audio feed. I heard the aggressive shouting of federal agents ordering people to clear the area. Above all the commotion, the shrill, hysterical screaming of my sister Chloe sliced through the background noise like a jagged knife. She was shrieking at the top of her lungs, completely inconsolable as her wealthy lifestyle evaporated in real time. I also heard the loud, aggressive yelling of Brad's white parents. They were shouting at the restaurant management, demanding to be let out of the back door so they would not be photographed by the local press near their criminal son. Suddenly, the phone was violently snatched away from my father. A loud scuffle echoed through the speaker, followed by the frantic, breathless sobbing of my mother, Valerie. Maya, please, you have to do something. Valerie wailed, her voice cracking under the weight of utter humiliation. This is an absolute catastrophe. Brad's parents just publicly disowned him right in the middle of the dining room and walked out, leaving us with the massive restaurant bill. Chloe is literally lying on the floor, crying her eyes out, and her $5,000 dress is completely ruined with spilled champagne. Everyone in the city is watching us. Valerie let out a pathetic, choking sob, completely abandoning any shred of her former country club pride. You have to use your military connections, Maya. You just stood next to the Secretary of Defense. Call him. Call whoever you have to call and get the FBI to drop these ridiculous charges immediately. We are your family, Maya. You cannot just leave us here like this. I sat perfectly still in the quiet, secure green room of the Pentagon. I looked down at the beautiful silver star resting on my uniform. I did not raise my voice to argue with her. I did not yell about the forged deeds, the stolen identity, or the decades of emotional abuse they had forced me to endure. I simply kept the phone pressed to my ear. I listened to the wailing sirens, the screaming sister, the panicked mother, and the terrified father. I let the absolute chaotic symphony of their total destruction wash over me. I did not utter a single syllable. I just listened to the devastating consequences of their own actions for a full 10 seconds of dead-cold absolute silence. The 10 seconds of dead silence stretched out like a physical weight pressing down on the phone line. I let them drown in it. I let the sound of blaring police sirens, shattered glass, and Chloe weeping form the background music to their absolute ruin. When I finally decided to speak, my voice was glacial, completely void of any sympathy or familial warmth. You told me yesterday that I was an embarrassment. I said, my tone flat and lethal. You sent me a voice note explicitly stating that my military career was a masculine joke and that you would never stand next to me. You made it abundantly clear that I was an unwanted outsider ruining your elite social climbing. The frantic hyperventilating on the other end of the line suddenly hitched. My mother gasped, realizing her own toxic words were now the exact nails sealing her coffin. Maya, please. Valerie begged, her voice cracking under the sheer terror of federal consequences. We were just stressed about the party. You know we did not mean those things. We are your parents. You cannot just leave us here to deal with this nightmare. You stopped being my parents the second you decided a white con artist was worth more than your own daughter's future, I replied, slicing through her pathetic attempt at manipulation. You traded your actual bloodline for a cheap temporary illusion of wealth. You watched Brad actively try to steal my identity, and you cheered him on because you thought it would buy you a country club membership. I heard my father grab the phone back, his breathing ragged and uneven. Maya, you have to stop this. You are destroying the family. Call the authorities and tell them it is a misunderstanding. I did not destroy anything. I stated, my voice echoing with unyielding authority in the quiet green room. I simply handed you the mirror. Brad stole my active duty military identity to commit a massive federal crime. He tried to ruin my entire life, my credit and my security clearance to fund a fraudulent lifestyle. And you, Dad, you forged the deed to Granddad's historic church to hand it over to a scammer just for a tiny pathetic taste of status. I was trying to build our wealth. Thomas pleaded, his voice breaking into a pathetic, desperate whine. I was trying to elevate our congregation to the next level. Yao betrayed our entire community. I countered fiercely, refusing to let him hide behind his pastoral collar for one more second. You took the sacred sanctuary our people built with their bare hands, the very land my grandfather bled for, and you handed it to a luxury developer so you could drink champagne with people who openly despise you. You sold out your own people. You are a traitor to your heritage, a traitor to your congregation, and a disgrace to your own father. The truth hit him like a physical blow. I could hear him weeping on the other end of the line. The proud, arrogant pastor who had spent decades preaching about sacrifice had been exposed as nothing but a greedy, hollow shell. Suddenly, a high-pitched, hysterical screech pierced the audio feed. Chloe had clearly snatched the phone from our father's trembling hands. Maya, you psycho! Chloe screamed, her voice completely unhinged and dripping with delusion. Make them let Brad go right now. Tell the FBI it was a joke. And you need to call Aunt Beatrice this second. Tell her to wire us that $4 million. We need that money to save the house and pay for Brad's defense team. You owe us that money to fix this massive disaster. The sheer, breathtaking entitlement of her demand actually made me laugh. It was a cold, humorless sound that lacked any trace of joy. My sister was standing in a ruined $5,000 designer dress, watching her fraudulent husband get hauled away in federal handcuffs, and she still believed the universe owed her a bailout. Brad's wealthy parents had literally run out the back door, leaving Chloe and my parents with a massive unpaid restaurant bill and a shattered reputation, yet Chloe still thought she could order me around. That money belongs to the woman you and your parents threw out onto the street, I replied, my words striking with absolute finality. Aunt Beatrice is going to use every single cent of that retroactive compensation to restore the church you almost destroyed. Not a single penny is going to your legal defense. You wanted to live in the big leagues, Chloe. Welcome to the big leagues. Good luck with the federal legal fees. Maya, do not you dare hang up on me. You have to save us. I pulled the phone away from my ear and tapped the red end call button. The connection severed instantly. The chaotic, screaming nightmare of the Jackson family was permanently cut off from my life. I placed the phone face down on the polished mahogany coffee table. I exhaled a long, steady breath, feeling an immense, crushing weight completely lift off my shoulders. I was finally free. I sat back in the plush leather armchair, adjusting the heavy silver star pinned to my chest. The silence in the green room was beautiful and deeply restorative. I had executed the mission perfectly. The threat to my grandfather's legacy was eliminated. The federal criminals were in custody, and the toxic parasites I used to call family were left to face the devastating consequences of their own unmitigated greed. Before I could even reach for my glass of water, the heavy oak door of the green room swung open. My commanding officer, Colonel Hayes, strode into the room. He was accompanied by a stern-looking man wearing a dark suit and an FBI identification badge clipped to his belt. Colonel Hayes looked at me, his expression a mixture of profound professional respect and serious urgency. He clasped his hands behind his back. Captain Jackson, Colonel Hayes said, his booming voice filling the quiet room. We just received a highly critical update from the field agents on the ground in Nashville. I stood up immediately, snapping to a position of parade rest. Has the primary suspect been secured, sir? Bradley Miller is currently in federal custody and en route to a holding facility. The FBI liaison stepped forward to answer. But that is not the primary update, Captain. The situation regarding your father has rapidly escalated. The agent held out a digital tablet displaying a live aerial feed from a police drone. The local congregation just found out exactly what your father did to the church deed. The news broke through the community network 5 minutes ago. I looked at the high-definition screen, watching the chaotic scene unfolding hundreds of miles away. What is happening? They are not waiting for Sunday service to handle this betrayal, Colonel Hayes stated grimly. Hundreds of furious church members and local community activists have completely surrounded your parents' house. The local police are calling for tactical backup. The live drone feed, showing my parents surrounded by furious church members, was the last image I saw before the Pentagon security team ushered me out of the green room. 3 days later, the federal protocol required my physical presence back in Tennessee to finalize the financial lockdown. I sat in the back of an armored military police transport vehicle riding alongside Aunt Beatrice. Two armed military officers sat in the front seats assigned to escort me due to the severe nature of the identity theft committed by my relatives. The heavy tires of the armored vehicle crunched against the familiar pavement of my parents' affluent suburban neighborhood. As we turned the final corner onto their street, the chaotic reality of their total downfall came into sharp focus. The manicured front lawn of the Jackson residence looked like a bomb had gone off inside a luxury boutique. Chloe's expensive designer luggage, the exact bags she bragged about buying for her anniversary trip, were violently thrown across the grass. Several suitcases were split open, spilling her custom gowns directly into the dirt. Brad's wealthy white parents had not just disowned him at the restaurant. They had immediately evicted Chloe from their guest estate, throwing her belongings onto the street the second the FBI hauled their son away. She was officially homeless and her fairy tale marriage was completely dead. But the scattered luggage was not the most devastating sight on the property. A massive crowd of betrayed churchgoers had overtaken the sidewalk. The senior deacons of the Ebenezer Baptist Church, who had trusted my father for decades, stood shoulder to shoulder, holding signs, demanding his immediate resignation. They chanted loudly, their voices filled with the righteous fury of a community that just discovered their pastor tried to sell their sanctuary to developers. The military police transport rolled to a slow stop, right at the edge of the driveway. The flashing blue and red lights of the federal vehicle instantly caught the attention of the angry crowd. The chanting died down as the church deacons parted respectfully, allowing the armored door to slide open. I stepped out of the vehicle first, my combat boots hitting the concrete with a heavy, authoritative thud. Aunt Beatrice stepped out right behind me, standing tall and completely unafraid. The heavy metal door sliding shut alerted the people cowering inside the house. The front door of the residence violently swung open. My father, Thomas, my mother, Valerie, and my sister, Chloe, stumbled out onto the front porch. They looked absolutely horrific. Thomas was wearing a wrinkled shirt, his eyes bloodshot and frantic. Valerie had clearly not slept or washed her face in days, her hair completely disheveled. Chloe was practically hyperventilating, gripping her cell phone like a useless lifeline. The moment they locked eyes on my military uniform and the armed escorts flanking me, their last remaining shred of pride completely evaporated. In a display of sheer pathetic desperation that made my stomach churn, all three of them sprinted down the front steps and literally dropped to their knees on the hard concrete driveway. Valerie scrambled forward on her hands and knees, ignoring the disgusted gasps of the church members nearby. She lunged toward me, grabbing the thick leather of my combat boots. "Maya, please," Valerie wailed, her voice cracking as tears streamed down her blotchy face. "You have to save us, Maya. We are family. Blood is thicker than water. You have to tell these people to leave us alone. Brad tricked us. He manipulated your father. He lied to all of us about the church deed. We are innocent victims in this. Please, you have $4 million now. Use Aunt Beatrice's money to pay off the bank and save our house. They are foreclosing on us tomorrow." Chloe crawled forward, sobbing so hard she could barely articulate her words. Brad's family kicked me out onto the street, Chloe screamed, wiping a mixture of dirt and makeup from her face. They canceled all my credit cards. I have absolutely nothing left, Maya. You have to wire us the money. You cannot let your own sister be homeless. We are blood. Thomas kneeled in the driveway, staring up at me with pleading eyes. He raised his shaking hands as if praying to me instead of the God he claimed to serve. Maya, I was a fool. Thomas cried out, his voice completely devoid of any pastoral authority. I was blinded by ambition, but I never meant to hurt you. Please just sign a small portion of the settlement over to us. We will lose everything. I looked down at the three people groveling in the dirt. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no obligation. I stepped backward forcefully, jerking my boots out of my mother's frantic grip. Valerie fell forward, scraping her palms against the rough concrete, but I did not offer a hand to help her up. I reached into the tactical bag resting against my hip and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. I held it up high, making sure the senior church deacons standing behind me could clearly see the official financial seal stamped on the front cover. You were not tricked by Brad, I said, my voice slicing through the heavy, humid air with absolute lethal precision. You knew exactly what he was doing, and you gladly funded his entire fraudulent lifestyle. I slapped the thick folder down onto the hood of a nearby parked car. I did not just freeze my credit on Saturday. I authorized a full military audit of every single financial account tied to my stolen identity, which led the investigators directly into the church banking records. I looked directly into my father's terrified eyes, loudly projecting my voice so the entire congregation could hear the devastating truth. You did not just forge the deed to the sanctuary. You drained the entire college scholarship fund meant for the black youth in this community. You stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from the children of this congregation to pay for Chloe's lavish lifestyle, her luxury apartment, and Brad's fake business ventures. I lowered the heavy manila folder and shoved it directly into the chest of Head Deacon Hayes. He was a stern, older man who had dedicated his entire life to the Ebenezer Baptist Church. He grabbed the folder with shaking hands and flipped it open. The detailed bank statements, highlighted in bright yellow ink, proved exactly where the missing community donations had gone. The money meant to send the brightest youths of our neighborhood to college had been systematically funneled into Chloe's designer wardrobe and Brad's offshore shell accounts. Deacon Hayes looked up from the financial logs and locked his furious eyes onto my father. You stole from the children. Thomas Deacon Hayes roared, his voice vibrating with a righteous, absolute fury that made the entire congregation surge forward. We trusted you with our faith and our future, and you treated this sanctuary like your own personal ATM. The crowd completely erupted. Dozens of betrayed church members shouted in anger, pressing closer to the driveway. My father stumbled backward, completely terrified. He raised his hands, trying to placate the angry mob he used to command. He stammered out weak, pathetic excuses about temporary loans and bad investments, but his voice was entirely drowned out by the overwhelming outrage of the community he had betrayed. Valerie tried to shield him, shrieking at the congregation to show some respect for their pastor, but a senior choir member loudly told her to shut her mouth. The illusion of the perfect Jackson family was officially dead and buried. The sound of approaching sirens pierced through the shouting. Two local police cruisers sped down the residential street and aggressively pulled into the driveway, tires screeching against the concrete. 4 armed officers stepped out of the vehicles. They did not look at me or the angry congregation. They marched straight toward my father. Thomas Jackson, you are under arrest for grand theft and embezzlement of community trust funds, the lead officer announced, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Valerie let out a blood-curdling wail that scraped against my eardrums. She threw her arms around my father, trying to physically block the officers from taking him. Please, he is a man of God. Valerie screamed, tears ruining whatever makeup she had left on her face. You cannot do this to us. We have status. We are respectable people. The police officers effortlessly peeled Valerie off her husband. They slammed my father against the hood of his own expensive car, securing his wrists tightly in the metal cuffs. Thomas did not look at me. He kept his head bowed in absolute burning shame as they shoved him into the back of the squad car. Valerie collapsed onto the driveway, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. A few feet away, Chloe sat on top of her ruined designer luggage. She clutched her knees to her chest, rocking back and forth in the dirt. Her wealthy white husband was in federal prison. Her elite in-laws had thrown her onto the street. Her father was currently being hauled away in a police cruiser, and her mother was having a total nervous breakdown on the concrete. Chloe looked up at me, her eyes begging for a lifeline, for a final shred of sisterly mercy. I gave her absolutely nothing. I turned my back on the entire pathetic display. Aunt Beatrice stepped forward, addressing the furious deacons who were watching my father get driven away. "Do not worry about the sanctuary." Beatrice projected her voice, carrying a profound, comforting authority. "I am utilizing the $4.2 million the government awarded me to fully restore the church structure. I am also establishing a brand new untouchable scholarship trust for our youth." Thomas tried to erase my father's legacy, but I am going to make sure Sergeant James Jackson provides for this community for the next 100 years. The congregation erupted again, but this time it was a massive wave of cheering and applause. Deacon Hayes openly wept, grabbing Beatrice's hand and thanking her repeatedly. I placed my hand on my aunt's shoulder and guided her back toward the armored military police transport vehicle. We climbed into the secure cabin, and the heavy doors slid shut, locking out the noise of my former family. As the transport drove away from the property, I did not look back. I did not check the rearview mirror. There was absolutely nothing left for me in that driveway. 1 week later, the heavy scent of smoked brisket and grilled hot links filled the warm afternoon air. I stood on the expansive wooden deck of Aunt Beatrice's beautiful newly purchased home. She had bought a stunning property with plenty of land, a place where she could finally rest and enjoy the peace she had earned. I hosted my own cookout that Sunday. There was no toxic family present. There was no fake country club posturing, and no one begging for unearned status. The backyard was filled with my actual family. My military squad had flown in, bringing cases of cold drinks and loud booming laughter. Deacon Hayes and several loyal community members sat at the patio tables sharing stories about my grandfather. Aunt Beatrice was holding court near the grill, smiling brighter than I had ever seen her smile before. I looked down at the silver star, resting in the protective display case I held in my hands. The silver medal caught the bright afternoon sunlight. I had finally won my war. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my cell phone, and permanently deleted the contact information for Thomas, Valerie, and Chloe. Respect can never be begged from those who view you as a stepping stone for their greed. Sometimes letting them drown in their own arrogance is the sweetest revenge. Have you ever had to walk away from your blood relatives to save your own life? Share your story below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories of surviving betrayal and claiming justice. True respect can never be begged from people who view your existence merely as a stepping stone for their greed. Her journey teaches us that blood does not automatically grant someone the right to cross your boundaries, exploit your efforts, or erase your legacy. Sometimes the most profound act of courage is simply walking away and letting toxic relatives drown in the catastrophic consequences of their own arrogance. Family is ultimately defined by mutual respect, not biology. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your peace? Share your story below and please subscribe for more.